Welcome to Crash Course in Commercial Real Estate. We converted our in-house training program to a podcast to teach you prospecting, negotiation, business planning, and other fundamental skills to become a successful commercial real estate agent. And now, here's your host, Brady Collier.
All right, welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Training. I'm Brady Collier, and I've got Kyle Cowan here with me. I also got Shannon Powell. In case you didn't see the bios, I'm a broker and a commercial real estate broker in Lubbock, Texas. I'm training Shannon in commercial real estate, and our subject matter expert today is Kyle Cowan.
For lack of a better
description. Okay. I'm super excited of all of the episodes that I planned out. I planned 40 total episodes, and of all of them, this one was one of the most exciting for me. And the reason is because a commercial real estate broker, from the time they arrive and sit down in the morning to the time they get in their car and leave in the evening or afternoon, this is a skill that they are utilizing all day, every day. Not a business day passes where a commercial real estate broker is not negotiating. So I just want to dive into this topic. I want to slow down, take some time and unpack negotiation. Kyle's an expert negotiator. I've had him negotiating on my behalf, and I've unfortunately had him negotiating against me. And so having negotiated against him and with him, I thought he was really good. So I asked him to come on and help Shannon. So Shannon, feel free to take notes. This is going to be a lot of material over the next little bit here. So Kyle, let's start on the topic of negotiation. When people think about negotiation, they always think about it's me versus somebody else.
Right.
And a lot of times when people carry that mentality or that attitude into negotiation, you're totally starting off on the wrong foot. And I understand why people think me against someone else mentality in negotiation, so I can win and they can lose. But I personally believe that the best negotiations are win-win negotiations. If you can find a solution that's good for you, good for your client, good for the other broker, the other party that you're negotiating against, a win-win negotiation, I think, is always the ultimate solution. And so do you want to talk first about adversarial versus just a win-win strategy or style?
And I'll ask Shannon, when you think of negotiation, before being in the commercial real estate business, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think negotiator?
I think intense.
Okay. I feel like most people probably think used car salesman, right? Or they're some negative experience they've had with a sleazy, somebody trying to take advantage of you, just a bad experience that they've had. And so to your point, I think that's the wrong perception, because when you enter into a negotiation that way, you're intimidated, you're trying to take advantage of, and
you're defensive.
Yeah. It's just not, and I don't think it's effective either. Especially, and we hit on this on our other episode, just relationship and how important that is. I'm going to have hopefully future relationships with these landlords or other brokers. And my client that I'm negotiating on behalf of, whether I'm representing the landlord or the tenant, is entering into a 3, 5, 10-year relationship. And so I can't just go in and try to just hammer them to get a deal done, because we're entering into a long-term relationship, if not me, my client. And so I've found it most effective when you get on the phone and when you're having conversations to just work together, look for solutions. And that doesn't mean that you're not fighting for your client. Yeah. It just doesn't look the way most people imagine a multi-million-dollar negotiation would look like.
Right. You said several things were really good. I want to go back to one of them. One thing that's not awkward, but that's interesting about commercial real estate negotiations. With a used car salesman example that you gave, it's basically the car salesman is trying to sell it to you, and you're negotiating with and against him to get your price down. He wants his price up, so his commission is up. And then once you drive away, it's kind of over. That's totally opposite of what the relationships look like in commercial real estate, because that's why I say Kyle's negotiating from the time he hits the chair. For example, if a landlord calls him and wants to list a property, put some space on the market, or wants to sell some building, and he calls Kyle, in that relationship, what things do you have to negotiate?
Well, you have to negotiate the commission percentage to list the center.
And that's the biggest one. All commercial real estate agents, all real estate people say, what percentage of the total volume of the transaction am I going to make? And that's negotiated. It's not like, and in residential real estate, there's a standard thing out there that, and there's no quote unquote standard commission, but pretty much everybody knows it's this percentage on almost all houses. But in commercial real estate, it's a huge variance.
Whether it's a percentage, whether it's a dollar amount per square foot, the size of the transaction impacts that. The total square footage impacts that. So yeah. So before you're negotiating, your point, I guess, is before you're negotiating on behalf of your client, you're negotiating with your client. And so it's the commission percentage, and then it's the term of the listing agreement. It's tenants that might be excluded. It's how long you're protected after the listing agreement expires.
If you're putting a building on the market, it's the price range, because maybe they're way outside the market, and you're actually negotiating with them for their own good to get the listing into the market. Because if it's priced too high, it's a waste of your time, it's a waste of their time, it's terrible for everybody. And so there's so many things you're negotiating. You're on the opposite side with your landlord or your seller. But then as soon as you finish those negotiations, which is one reason you got to have a win-win mentality, as soon as you finish that negotiation, they execute your listing agreement. Now all of a sudden you're on their side. So if you just rolled over in the negotiations with the landlord or seller, they know you're a tremendously weak negotiator, and then you're not good for them representing them towards every buyer, tenant, anybody, other agent that brings a deal. So you have to strike this perfect balance, no pressure, this perfect balance of negotiating against your client in the beginning, quote unquote, against your client in the beginning, and then turning on and you're on their team, negotiating for them for sometimes a month or two if you get the listing sold really quickly, but sometimes years you're representing that client.
And you brought up a really good point where you're negotiating against them and then with them. And that just brought up, I didn't think about this before as we entered into this content, but most of the tenants I represent, I was negotiating against them on the landlord side first, because I started primarily as a landlord agent, and most of the tenant relationships I have spawned out of those landlord rep situations. So I don't know if it's because they liked me or because I negotiated well against them, probably a combination of both, which gets to the point.
Maybe because they respected you. Right. They liked you, but they also respected. And that's what's really hard when you're negotiating, is keeping it not only cordial, friendly, relational, to where during a negotiation you're building relationship, not destroying relationship. I had an experience the other day where I was negotiating with another commercial real estate agent on a deal, and we're going to talk here a little bit about working for the deal and working for the client. But I asked this agent, I said, hey, my buyer, I think I can get them here, I don't know for sure, but I think I can based on something that happened. Do you think your seller would be willing to And I was trying to work on solutions with the agent before going back to the client. And this agent told me, said, I can't say what my seller's going to do. Why don't you just bring it to me in writing and we'll find out what my seller's going to do. And it was such an adversarial spirit within it. I was so, I was just put out.
Turned off.
I was just really turned off with working with that agent and on the deal in general. And I went back to my client and it's like, I just don't know, so I had to go back to my client and still make the deal work. And we got the deal put together. But that's not the style of negotiation I think is most positive or productive in real estate space.
But it is a style, and it's a style that a lot of people have found success in. I would just argue that the success is probably isolated to a deal rather than over a long career. And, someone may argue, well, then you're hurting your client for your own career. And I would just disagree with that, because I'm going to work with this client over and over. We hit on this already, but I'm going to work. It's in my landlord's best interest, and it's in my tenant's best interest that their reputation is good, and how I negotiate impacts their
that's right.
Would you say most of the brokers you work with, and maybe you touched on it, which style do you typically run into?
It's a really great question. Glad you asked that. And I'm going to say something, and for all of those out there, please don't take offense and kill me in the comments section. Really experienced commercial real estate agents who've been at it for 5-10 years. I normally find a great sense of camaraderie with them, where we have aligned interest, it's relational, it's non-emotional. Normally when I deal on commercial deals with a residential agent jumping into the commercial space, it's a completely different feel of negotiations. So that would be my immediate response. Kyle, how would you answer that question as far as what characterizes most of your commercial real estate negotiations?
It's all over the board. I think it's region to region. I think there's a West Texas, we're here in Lubbock, and so there's a West Texas way of doing business that I think promotes the camaraderie, as you mentioned, and working together towards a solution, and that people like. And then if I'm dealing with a big REIT out of the Northeast, no offense to you New Yorkers you people from either of the coasts,
Boston.
Really, or California, there's just a different way of doing business and a different way of negotiating that, they've been successful. That's why I want to say that there are other ways to negotiate and find success. Just don't know if it's worth it.
I'm going to close this one out, and then I'm going to close this episode out and just address that issue. There are people who believe that every negotiation should be a win-lose. And there's a guy that I know of here in Lubbock, Texas, and if he's across the table from you and he can't walk away from the table knowing he won and you lost, he considers it a failed negotiation. But over the 20 years I've known this guy, nobody in town wants to work with him. They hesitate to take him deals. They dread calling him. And I just don't know if it's healthy for him, for his clients, or for anybody. And so my parting shot on this episode is seek win-win solutions. Buyer, seller, both can walk away feeling good. Tenant, landlord. You across the table from your landlords, from your tenants, from your sellers, from your buyers. Seek win-win solutions. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close off this episode there. I've got at least one or two more on negotiation. I want to drill into several questions that came up that I have specifically for you on some things that you said. So join us on the next episode for more on commercial real estate negotiation.